I keep finding myself in these weird situations where there's this hotly anticipated show or movie that's being very questioned or criticized by fans of the source material that I haven't seen. Yeah, I haven't read the Sandman comics. I'm sorry, I'm a bad geek. It's on the list, along with a lot of other stuff I keep meaning to get around to, but haven't had time for yet. And what makes it so weird is that, more often than not, the reasons why these things are so criticized are things that I end up being okay with, while the issues I have with them tend to be entirely different stuff. Such is the case with Netflix's The Sandman. And I'll just put it out there right now. Watching this show is like being a blind person at Disneyworld. I'm enjoying the ride, but I have no idea what the ride is, which Neil Gaiman stuff does have a habit of doing to me sometimes. I really like Neverwhere, but I'll be damned if I could tell you what that book was about. Good Omens? I saw what the book was going for, but I had trouble getting into it. On the other hand, I really love the Coraline and Stardust movies, so for me, Neil Gaiman is in sort of a strange category where I know his stuff is good, and I'm always interested when he's working on something, but I'm never quite sure if it's for me. And that brings us to Netflix's Sandman Adaptation, and fans have been critical of this project because of some casting choices and other things. I guess some characters from the graphic novels have been race-bent or gender-swapped. Apparently the character Death is bleach white in the comics and was changed into a brown-skinned black woman, stuff like that. And I could talk about that, but I don't really feel like it in this case. I prefer actors to resemble the characters they're playing as much as possible, but Neil Gaiman is heavily involved with the show. I think he's one of the showrunners, and if he's signed off on all these changes, then I'm not gonna make a big stink about it. I don't want to be one of those people who complain just to complain, and if the creator of Sandman approved of all this, then so be it. It's a comic I haven't read anyway, so it's not a big deal to me, and frankly, if the show has a problem, the cast is not it. In fact, I'll say that overall, with one or two exceptions, the cast is really, really good, and most of the characters I've heard people complaining about, Death, Desire, Joanna Constantine, these are not major characters. You're talking about people who exist for like half an episode or a handful of scenes at most, and then they're gone. So I don't think they're worth getting that upset about. What bugged me more, and what I think affected the show more, was what was done with these characters. I'll get to it. But first, big picture stuff. Generally speaking, the show looks beautiful. Some parts of it are absolutely stunning. Netflix definitely poured a lot of money into the effects budget, but I think the show's ambition might have outstripped that budget a little bit. There are parts of it that look as good or better as something you'd see in a big sprawling fantasy movie in theaters. Scenes that take place in The Dreaming or Hell, for example, are just gorgeous to behold. But they also have a lot of green screen shots that are very obvious. Sometimes they'll even green screen things that they didn't need to. Like one episode has scenes in a church, and they green screened the church. Why? Were there no actual churches they could have shot this at? At one point they green screened an empty field. It's so weird. The CG is great for the most part, but the green screen does get pretty excessive. Most of the actors are very well cast, and it is a really impressive cast. Some of them might not look like the characters from the comics, but I thought the acting made up for it. But one they really screwed up on was a character named Rose. She was the one case where I thought the actor was just bringing nothing to the table. The character is involved in some pretty deep, metaphysical, profound things, and the actor just looked lost through the whole process. Like she didn't know what to do with any of it. Maybe she needed better direction or something, but if a character is in a situation where the fate of the world is at stake, or she thinks she's about to die, and her reaction is the equivalent of, "Oh no, a bad thing is happening. Well, that's not good," then I think the casting department might have missed the mark with this one. And the entire season kind of hinges on that particular character, so that was not the one to get wrong. Also, the Joanna Constantine character I don't think worked as well as they were hoping. If you want to swap out John Constantine for a female version, you've got to earn that. And I'm not sure if it was the character or Jenna Coleman playing her, but Joanna just just didn't have nearly the same level of charisma or depth or gravitas that John does. Joanna just felt like a snarky person doing a job, and considering the backstory they give her, she really should have more going on than that. So this wasn't a great choice in my opinion. You could have just called up Matt Ryan and gotten a much more compelling performance, but again, it's one episode, and like 2 scenes in another one, so it's not like this ruined the whole show. Most interesting to me was Tom Sturridge as Dream. This performance felt spot on to me because he deliberately acts differently from everyone else here. He feels very detached from the other characters. He's the least expressive person on the show. He speaks very slowly and deeply, and everything he says feels like it has a kind of profound substance behind it. He really does act like I'd imagine an immortal or endless being would act. So he brings a lot of layers to Dream with his performance, and the character is really interesting, but he's also hard to connect with because of this. And what's odd about it is that all the other Endless characters are not like that. The others are so much more outgoing. They actually feel alive, whereas Dream kind of doesn't. They're all unique in their own way, and I know Dream was locked up in a glass ball for 100 years, so that might have something to do with this, but why are the others written to have so much more personality than him? Why is he the only one like this? Now maybe he was written to be that way in the comics I haven't read, but if so, that might be something that just doesn't translate well to live action. And as interesting as the performance and the character are, it does make him an awkward protagonist in that he reveals so little, and it's really hard to get a read on this guy. And honestly, the story is the same way. And let me preface it with something first, alright? I like the writing on this show. There are some fascinating concepts here. The characters are deep and complex, the stories are thought-provoking, and the emotion is really genuine. I teared up several times during this season. Hell, episode 6 is one of the most emotionally poignant hours of television I've seen in a long time. It's sad, thoughtful, uplifting, nuanced, and a million other things all at once. Another episode takes place almost entirely in a diner, and it's one giant character study of all the people in there. Really well done, intelligent stuff. So the writing is very good. But the problem is, the story doesn't seem to know where it's going or why. It has a habit of not explaining important details very well, and the pacing is slow isn't the right word, because the plot doesn't drag exactly, but it does take its time. It does meander. Aimless is a good way to describe it. Like, the first half of the season is about Dream trying to recover the tools that were taken from him while he was imprisoned, but it's never entirely clear what these tools even are, what they do, or why he needs them. And you do learn some things about this stuff, but so much of it is kept vague or purposefully mysterious, and even by the end of the season, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were a lot of details I was still missing. And then around the halfway point in the season, the story pivots and goes off in a new direction without much of a payoff to everything they've been doing so far. Dream has his tools back, and the villain of that arc has been dealt with, but it seemed like all that stuff was handled very easily. There wasn't much of a struggle. It's a person with intentions that aren't good for the dreaming. Dream stops them, and there's no big blow-up or cataclysmic something or other. It's resolved fairly quietly, and then they just move on. And it's not the only time that happens. There are several mini-boss type villains throughout the season, and the big one, the Corinthian, gets a lot of hype. They start building this guy up from the first episode, and all season long, he's this mysterious figure stirring shit up for some kind of terrible purpose, and this guy is awesome. I was really digging him. He's so creepy, so charismatic, and it seemed like he had a plan for something really bad. I was never sure what the plan was, but I was sure he had some kind of endgame in mind, or a vendetta against Dream that he wanted to carry out. But then when they have their big confrontation, he's defeated so quickly and so easily, it made me wonder what the hell all the hype was for, because it didn't seem to add up to very much at all. And it gets more confusing when they reveal the real big bad who's been pulling the strings this whole time, because that person barely does anything. This character appears in maybe maybe 3 or 4 scenes in the entire season. It's never explained why they were doing this, what the point of it was, what they were trying to accomplish, or what the ramifications would be if they'd succeeded. And then once it's resolved, there aren't any consequences for them. They're not even that bothered by their plan failing. They're just like, oh well, that didn't work. Next time will be better. Meanwhile, I'm just scratching my head trying to figure out why the hell any of this happened and coming up with squat. So the show keeps doing this weird thing where the villains keep getting defeated either very easily in such a way that there's no payoff, or there is a payoff but it's not clear what it is. And the pacing doesn't help with that. Again, slow isn't the right word, but there's hardly any sense of urgency. And Dream is part of the problem with that, unfortunately. He never acts anxious or nervous or agitated or stressed out or anything. He just kind of stays in the same mode all the time. So if there's an urgent situation, some kind of big pressing emergency that has to be dealt with immediately, you wouldn't know it by watching him. But really, the plot isn't doing itself any favors in that area either. There are story threads that carry over throughout the season, but a lot of the episodes are self-contained, and they're doing a bunch of character deconstructions, and there are some one-off stories in there, and some of these are developing the villains, but since the villains are defeated so easily, afterward you're left asking why we spent so much time with these people. I mean, I enjoyed the ride, but what was the ride for? I don't know. We were either building up to a payoff that didn't really happen, or a payoff I didn't understand. So while these antagonists are compelling characters and very well acted, nothing about them really accelerates the narrative, and I think that was on purpose. The writers made the creative decision to intentionally keep the story in first gear all the way through, and I couldn't tell you why. Even when they finally introduce a big cataclysmic thing that needs to be stopped, it never feels like there's a race against time to stop it. The characters don't act like they're in a rush. The plot doesn't even seem to want to rush to deal with it. And it might be easier to make that work on the comic page, but in a TV show, this should have felt a lot more exciting than it ended up being. And even though there are real stakes for the dreaming and the mortal world here, the urgency of that never really hits you. 1, because of these creative choices, and 2, because it all hinges on the Rose character, played by the most out-of-place deer-in-the-headlights actor in the entire show, who just can't sell this the way she needs to. Similarly, Dream needs his tools back, but there's no ticking clock. There's no approaching shitstorm that'll f*** everything up if he doesn't get them back right f***ing now. That already happened while he was gone. It's important business because he says it is, I guess, but it's not treated like something that can't wait. And there's also the issue of this thing called a vortex, which is what the whole season builds up to, but we, the audience, have no context for it. It's talked about for several episodes before they even get around to explaining what the hell it is, and once they do, it's almost too big of a concept to even wrap your head around. So the concept itself is cool, but you don't feel scared by it, which probably should have been the first thing they made sure to get right. Add all these things together, and you might really enjoy each episode. You might even love each episode, but they don't leave you with the feeling of, oh my god, I have to watch the next one right now to find out what happens. It's more like, yeah, I'll watch these 2 episodes tonight, maybe I'll get to the next one tomorrow or the day after. I am curious to see what's next, but there's no rush, and I've got some other stuff to do first, and the show's not going anywhere, so I'll get to it when I get to it. It's a very leisurely watch in that way. Now compare that to Lock and Key Season 3, for example, which I dove into right after I finished Sandman, and that doesn't waste any time in getting things moving. It's very clear what's at stake right off the bat. There's always a cliffhanger to lead you into the next episode. There's a palpable sense of danger about what the bad guys are up to, and those bad guys are actually tough to deal with, so I wanted to binge the whole season really quickly to find out what happened. I finished that one in a day, and that was for a season that, by comparison, wasn't even as strong as the first 2. Then, on the other side of the coin, you've got the Sandman. And not to mix metaphors or anything, but it's a lot like nodding off while reading a good book. You might really love the book, you'll definitely want to pick up where you left off after you wake up. The book's only problem is that it wasn't riveting enough to keep you awake in the first place. Even though I was really enjoying the show and the characters and the stories and the ideas, I have to admit, I still dozed off once or twice while I was watching it. Not because it was bad, but a fascinating, albeit leisurely paced show still needs a sense of excitement to keep you glued to your seat, And that's what was missing here. This is such a hard show to rate. Most of the actors and the characters are great, but some of the creative choices made with them don't really serve the narrative in a practical sense. The writing is terrific, but not in a way that leaves you chomping at the bit to find out what happens next. The concepts are very thought-provoking, but not necessarily exciting. It might make you feel things. It might even break your heart, but it won't get your adrenaline pumping. I'm so torn on this, but I've got to pick a rating, so here we are. It gets the seal of approval, but it's borderline. It beats the hell out of a lot of the other crap out there right now, and as an adaptation, it feels very tasteful. I just think I appreciate this show more than I like it, if that makes any sense. There's obvious effort and intelligence and heart in this project, even if some of the choices they made might not have been the best way to go in terms of keeping the audience on tenterhooks, and it did make me want to read the comics that much more, but I think the upshot here is that despite all the positives this show has, and there are a lot of them, TV might not have been the best medium for the Sandman. Ironically, the best one, I think, would be comics. So if this show ends up drawing more attention to the comics, I think it's done its job, but if you're a Sandman fan debating whether or not to watch the show, you might be better off just going back and reading the comics again. Thanks for checking out this video. Let me know what you thought about the Sandman in the comments. Ding that bell icon and follow my social media to be notified when I upload new stuff. Links to all that into my live streaming channel are down there. Thumbs up the video, share, subscribe, make sure you're still subscribed, and I'll be back with more soon. So you guys take care, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.